it up a bit.
All right, so now we're recorded, so I guess we maybe should just go on the record with who's on the call. Alan, do you want to start?
Yes, Alan Fritz is here.
Dick
Cliff
Patella is here.
Cliff Bombard's here.
Doug Boyd.
Hello, Chair Cox.
Carol Fitzgerald.
Full
All right.
house.
There we go. So we're missing Paul. Hopefully he'll jump on at some point. Oh, here he comes right now.
Oh, you there?
It takes a couple steps.
Did everybody have a chance to look at the response that we got from Bob? I assume it was from Bob on the outstanding issues sheet.
Yeah, I think it was actually Don who I think wrote it and responded.
I didn't see it.
And I just got that, sent that off to everybody. My apologies. This afternoon, my workday kind of got away from me. He sent it off to me this morning.
Yeah, I haven't read it yet, so I didn't get a chance to look at it. I'll look at it now.
But we can certainly talk about the responses. He's been able to respond to almost all of our items that we had from last week.
Before we begin, if I might just say that Carol and I were thinking that given where we are with after last week's review, that tonight we ought to just run through the budget again, fill in with the answers that we've just received, identify the areas where we need additional information. And I think that's probably all we're gonna be able to do. Carol, what do you think?
Yeah, because I think that there's still going to be some outstanding issues, particularly as it relates to the dispatch. The Board of Selectmen is meeting tomorrow, and I think that's on their agenda. So we'll know, I think, one way or another, which way they're going to go. And that has kind of a ripple effect on a few other line items. But I think if we can really start to fill in what we were missing from last week, and then, the dispatch number it's a big number if it comes out, and it kind of is a significant consequence if it stays in and they defer the decision, or don't do the Westcom and then deal with Wilbraham or whatever. So I think there's a lot of implications around the dispatch. So I don't know that we're going to have a good bottom line after tonight.
Well, they're committed to making a decision tomorrow night. Now, that's subject to the May 4th date being firm. And I think they should make a decision. When we get to town meeting, that's where the decision's going to be made, because somebody will get up and amend the police budget to increase the amount to provide for dispatch. And there goes the discussion and supposedly the decision. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, it will be a town meeting decision. I mentioned that as a response to Jim Smith today on Facebook, which is probably the second time in my life I ever responded to something on Facebook. But he seems to have a pretty level approach to it. He's kind of hung up on Wilbraham. I'm still not convinced what's in it for Wilbraham. But that being the case, let's keep in mind, town meeting will decide. And even if they sign a contract, it will be subject to appropriation.
Right, as it should be.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Carol,
even,
on the information you got from Bob on the line items, what is the sum of that? Plus or minus how many dollars when you add them all up?
Oh, I didn't add them all up. Some of them were just confirming numbers that we already knew. And so we can go through those. I think that's maybe the place to start, Doug. What do you think, is to go through?
I think so, yeah.
So, and I did include, Cliff and Dick, I did include you on the email with all of this on it. So you'll be able to see that as well, if you didn't already look at it.
And we'll work from the green sheet that our secretary sent out, dated today.
Yeah.
For 2020. Okay,
Right. Cliff also did, just in case people hadn't seen it yet, send along another kind of version of that green sheet, as we had talked last time, to include fiscal 2018, 19, and 20, so we could see the history of the actual expended funds. Just as we start to, make our decisions and take a look at things, we can see some of the history. So we've got that to review kind of between now and next time as well.
you already have a copy of that you're gonna send to us?
You should have a copy of that too, Alan, because Cliff sent
Oh,
it
okay.
to everybody.
I didn't look in the last couple hours on my emails.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, some of the, just the timing of getting some of this hit today. And I know that people don't always have access to their emails right before the meeting. So, but I think we've got, enough to do tonight with the response from the board that we can talk about, as Doug had said earlier.
You're forgiven. It's a tough situation.
All right, so what we did is we sent them just a summary. We sent the board a summary of the line items we thought were outstanding based on my notes and Doug's notes from last week. So we started with 5.0, the building inspector, the building department.
Yes.
So, and essentially what they're doing is they are, kind of, I get the impression, agreeing with the numbers that were put forth. Here's Paul.
Took me 10 minutes to get on. I don't know. I had to shut my computer off and start all over again.
Well, it's because
You're
you're
in
in
outer
You're in the space lab.
It's because I'm in outer space. People always thought I was in outer space anyways. You guys can all get a background too if you want one, There's a way to do it, by the way.
Oh, that's funny.
Sorry I'm late.
Actually, Paul, we were just starting reviewing the responses which we received from the board today in response to our questions.
Okay.
And we're starting with the building inspector, which is 5.0.
Yep.
I don't know if you had a chance to review. It was
I started downloading everything a little while ago, and I didn't have a chance to look through everything.
You have the green sheets labeled for 2020 in front of you that our secretary sent out today.
Yeah, but Cliff said something out in the secretary. Are they the same thing?
No, Paul, the one that I sent out is the one you asked for, to show prior years.
Yeah, I thought that was great. So it's not the same thing?
No.
Can I use that?
Well, that's what I'm doing is, well, yes, because I think the requested still remains the same. What I included was what was actually spent in 18 and 19. And keep in mind, those actuals are net of the different interfund or interdepartmental changes. In other words, if $5,000, $12,000 was approved from advisory emergency fund into the what do we put that into? Legal. All right. What I did was net that. So I increased what we actually spent, which showed it previously what we spent. I actually increased it by the 12,000 they actually spent, if I said that the right way.
Well, to answer Alan's question, I downloaded what Cliff sent me, I think.
Well, that still will have the requested on the right-hand column. So
Okay.
I didn't change that.
Okay, I'm sorry, everybody, because now Patullo's at some racetrack somewhere. So it's my fault. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're going to create a monster there, Paul. So the only thing I would say between Cliff's and Kristen's, and Cliff, I don't know if you, because Doug and I had given Kristen a couple of changes that she tweaked after our meeting that we were sure of. So whether they got to yours or not, we'll
No,
have
they
to figure
didn't.
that out. So
They did not.
What's your new total for 5.0?
So the 5.0, the board did not change any of those building inspector amounts. They basically justified those expenses and those increased hours, saying that the duties and the responsibilities increased over the last few years, especially involving the solar projects and now the stormwater projects for permitting and enforcement.
So what's the bottom line?
Number which they
119,048?
submitted, Alan.
It's the same. It's the same as was submitted.
Okay,
The board of Selectmen is supporting what came over from the building department.
Okay, my question is that Karen gets a certain dollar amount every week as clerical. They're saying part of the increase would be because of her duties working with the stormwater. My question is, will she now get the higher thing every single week, regardless of whether she works in the stormwater, or will there be a separate amount submitted because she worked on the stormwater committee? Because I understand they have to submit certificates of insurance, and they have to submit the, all the paperwork to go ahead. So I guess she has to work with that, but I'm not sure that that's a weekly thing.
The history of that department is whatever you budget, that's what they're going to spend in hours every week.
Right, right.
I wonder if it makes sense, for those hours to be coded as stormwater, in the event that, there's ever any type of a state or a federal program involving that. But I have the sense that's going to continue to grow. And that if we can designate that separately, that may behoove us down the line.
I agree with that. Or we can have her bill her designated hours to the actual stormwater account that they're asking for. So either way.
I think you might be adding some complexity where I don't see any possible advantage.
I agree. I mean, they're saying she added 4 hours per week, and you're gonna ask her to decide of those 4 hours, which went to stormwater. I don't know.
Well, they told us that the 4 hours was because of stormwater, but hey, if you want to leave it in, that's okay.
So is she currently doing hours that are related to stormwater?
Yes.
That is just really started. I've only seen a couple of stormwater permits issued, or I've seen turned in fees from them.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fairly new requirement, so I think a little bit is they're guessing, but it is really a new thing. I just don't know how much work it is.
All right. Do you
Well,
think?
maybe we leave it be and we keep an eye on it, because it is in all likelihood going to continue to grow. And it's an unfunded mandate that as of a year or two ago we didn't have in the budget, and now we're up to, I don't know what, 50,000 plus.
So I think in the explanation, the question is, they argue that her time has increased, or the whole time for the whole department has increased.
Mhm.
And then they cite the stormwater as one example. Is that, I think the clarity needs to be, is it because of stormwater, or is stormwater just an example and part of the whole picture? That's what I guess I'm getting at. I think that's what Dick is trying to say
Yeah.
too.
What I read in that was that it was the solar was a big part of it, Paul, and then also the stormwater. So those two things.
That's what I'm getting at. So I don't know if you can separate it out.
Yeah, and I think that we agree, maybe not right now to separate out, but as it becomes a bigger issue, we may need to identify those specific costs related to stormwater separately. But maybe for this year going in, we say we'll keep it as they've presented, and then have to make some decisions down the road if it looks like those costs are starting to really increase.
how many clerks do we have working for the town that work for more than one department? Is this a common problem that a clerk will work part of the time for one department and part of the time for another?
Well, that's not the case here. She works in the same office, reporting to the same person. Right now, I think we have Kristen, Jane, and Joanne are the three that jump to mind that have two different, work for two different departments.
So then my only thing would be, Doug and Carol, do we sort of make note to the selectmen that we'd like them to come back in a year or 6 months and let us know what the status of that is? I mean, just to let it go and not to say anything, to me would be,
We could ask them to internally track the hours. How much time is it to approve a certificate of insurance on a stormwater project or a permit on a storm? Keep track of your time on this.
Yeah, and this is only the second year that we've got stormwater in the budget.
Yes.
So I mean, we're still learning here.
and that committee reduced its budget by $14,000. So I mean, I don't know if there's a give and take there.
That's
Yeah,
because
but
the
that
original
money that they've
estimate,
been, that's been like fees for tie and bond. That's been vendors. That's not any kind of payroll.
right, the original estimate from Ty and Bond ended up on the high side, and they were able to reduce it to I think 47 or 45.
Mhm.
Okay.
But I mean, I think in terms of budgeting, I mean, as long as we have the money in the budget to pay the services that need to be accomplished from the management and the tracking perspective, that can be followed up either through the board or through the building department itself.
So,
Did we ask about the inspector's pay? Whether that was a rate increase or a,
They did answer that,
Yes.
Dick, indicating that the part of the increase
6
is-
hours a
it
week?
says the inspector completed coursework to obtain a building commissioner, and a portion of the increase is related to contractual increases. So it looks like it's a combination increase,
He has a contract?
yeah,
what
no,
the
he
response indicates.
All right.
I assume he's an employee at will, but
yeah, he doesn't have a contract, Dick. We're not aware.
By the way, who's the inspector?
Wendell Hulbert.
Okay.
I suppose we'll follow up with that question back then to determine whether there is an employment contract or not.
When we met with these various departments, we went over at our meeting with them, increases they did. So, and most of the departments had notes in their proposed budget as to why this was increasing or not. So a lot of this should already be obvious.
All right, I think we'll go back, see if we can get some clarification on that.
Mhm.
Can we move on to the next item, the 7.0 insurance?
Yep.
We asked the board whether or not there were 2 people receiving unemployment, and whether or not the 10,000, which was budgeted for last year and requested for the coming year, would be sufficient. And the response we received was that they wouldn't be able to answer that until they decide on the regionalization of dispatch. So they didn't address whether or not there's anybody actually on unemployment presently, or what the budget impact is in the current fiscal year or the coming fiscal year. So
Mhm.
kind of a non-answer answer.
Yeah, but according to Cliff's notes, for FY19 anyway, we spent 51,000. So, there, if we've got a couple of claims, that's more like a realistic figure.
Actually,
that didn't-
that's not. That was
Oh, is that
fixing,
that old stuff that we had?
That
Right.
old
that was
retro one.
fixing an old problem, penalties, interest, and everything for the sins of the past.
Right.
Okay.
We're spending approximately $4,500 a quarter right now on active recipients. So that's when, no other change. Everybody stays off and is eligible, you're probably looking at what, 19, 20,000 next year.
Mhm.
So if things go through after town meeting and there are changes, what's the recourse if they need more money?
Well, what we have done in the past is, because it's something we have to pay, we overdraw the account with the approval of the advisory board and the selectmen. And then at the end of the year, we use the Chapter 44 ability to transfer money from accounts that have available funds. So in effect, town meeting really doesn't get a chance to vote on it, because that activity, I hate to use the word hidden, but that activity is hidden at the end of the year and the way we net all of our reports.
Okay, so they, at the fall town meeting, they wouldn't come back and ask for X sum of money to cover that change?
Well, they may in the fall, yes, they may.
All right,
They haven't in the past, but they may.
It really depends on the amount, Paul.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I know. So let's assume, Doug, that maybe the amount is then estimated. You know, things happen and then the summertime, it becomes clear what happens. And let's just pick a number out of the air and just say that they need another $30,000. Wouldn't it be the proper way to come at town meeting and ask for $30,000 more for that account then, rather than to overspend?
I would agree with that. I mean, if we're talking that magnitude, in my opinion, it goes back to town meeting.
Okay.
I agree.
All right. So, I mean, we just make note of that, right?
Right.
Okay.
But-
So
but I-
until the board makes a decision on dispatch and we have some idea what's going to happen, we simply don't know what number we should be carrying there.
Okay.
But we may, before town meeting, know that. I mean, we should. And so we should know whether 4 or 5 people are going to need to be, collecting unemployment and what that estimated cost would be. So
Right.
we would have a pretty good idea of a number if they decide to move on the dispatch issue.
Okay.
And more to come.
Mhm.
All right, the next item that we asked about was 8.0 law and claims. We basically asked if the money, the 65, which is being carried, was sufficient, and what the breakdown of the expenses was on that money. And they sent through a response indicating that it's, it runs the gamut. The solar fields, there's a couple of MCAD issues. The school issue is a separate account, so that's not included in this particular line. But I think the upshot is that they don't anticipate any lessening of demand on the legal account.
Yeah, they basically passed that request on to me, and I would have had to go back and pull out all of the vouchers that we used to pay the bill, because they also wanted to know on what issues we spent money. And I basically emailed them back and said, all that stuff is in the town meeting or in the town hall. It's a selectman approved budget, and they should be able to have access to the records themselves.
Mhm.
And I said, we've spent money on everything, just like they're repeating only what I told them, what you just said.
Yeah. There was an email, and I don't recall, Carol, do you recall the email that came from Pam? If that went to everybody?
I got it.
You got it, and it had the itemization of the different accounts that the money was allocated to.
Right.
Yes, and it was spread over a large number of our departments. A little bit here, a little bit there, a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at it, and frankly, nothing struck me as unusual.
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's just a lot of activity across the town. So they're saying that the 65 number is a good number and we should hold with that.
Carry that.
Mhm. Yep.
And on the school litigation, and Cliff, I assume this number came from you. There's almost 25,000 remaining in that account for the legal associated with the school.
Yes.
And as far as I understand, that's pending partial summary judgment, and who knows time-wise when that'll be.
It's supposed to come out most any day now, but with the coronavirus, it may be delayed again.
Yeah, the courts are closed, basically.
Yeah,
But this is simply a judgment by the judge alone, so she could make it even from home, I would think.
well,
We will see.
all right, moving on. 12.0, the selectmen expenses, they requested 20,000, and this is where the stormwater was put, was 12.8, 45,000. And the response regarding the expenses is that the previous town administrator had a cell phone, conference attendance, and travel expenses, dues for Mass Municipal Association, and indicates the current town administrator does not use a town cell phone or laptop, but really doesn't answer the question of whether or not the 20 is necessary or not. Did anybody else get anything different from that?
I personally, I like the fact that we have a town administrator. I just think that if we're going to have a full-time town administrator, we create a separate line outside.
Well, we have a separate line for compensation. This is just the expenses in the.
Well, if those are, but if the expense account is covering his or her expenses, it should be under his or her. It's another one of those things where I know we're going to be on YouTube, so I got to be careful. It's just another one of those things that we should see how much the town administrator costs. And if you start putting it in different lines, you don't get the feel for what the total cost of that administrator is.
Right. All the expenses are being grouped together, which aren't necessarily related expenses.
Right, exactly. So if we pay for a phone, which I wouldn't have a problem doing, then the phone should have its own line account. How much does it cost a month for the phone? If it's gas or if it's reimbursement for conferences or if it's conference pay, there should be a conference line.
So we can ask them if these expenses are related solely to the administrator or if they're general office expenses, including the administrator. Does that make sense?
Right.
I think looks like Carol dropped out. But I think it makes sense to allocate expenses to the administrator that are specifically that expense, as opposed to the general office, which could be anything.
I don't mind money. I'm not arguing the money. I'm just arguing the placement.
Right. No, I agree. No, I agree. Anybody else weigh in on that?
Absolutely. That's the right way to go.
That's the way?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Can I ask a question? I have to plead naivety on this. The stormwater, what is the cost? Why are we, now we're seeing it in the selectmen's budget and we just dealt with 2 increases of personnel as a result of stormwater. So what's this for?
Stormwater is a Department of Environmental Protection program that's actually, I believe it's instigated by the feds, that requires every municipality to monitor their stormwater runoff. So every place in town where we have an outflow, so every place where there's a discharge from a storm drain, from anything, there have to be measurements, and there have to be samples taken to determine whether or not there's any contamination. That's where Ty and Bond comes in. They've got somebody that's running around taking samples from these outflows. And all of this requires reporting back to DEP, which is what the paperwork is. There was a question of where the responsibility for this should lie, because it's under the Board of Selectmen. But the Highway Department was the one that was originally dealing with it. The superintendent for the highway basically said that it really wasn't in his bailiwick. And that's why it's ended over with the building inspector. And the reason that the costs are somewhat indeterminate is because we're only in the second year of compliance. So we're kind of feeling our way.
Okay.
It's going to take another couple of years of experience before we have a good handle on it.
So I don't have a problem with that. I just don't know why, if the building inspector is the guy responsible for it, shouldn't that number be in his department versus the selectman department? That's,
What time is it now?
It's a little more complicated in that, and then
I'm here for a while.
it's a little more complicated in that the initial money, a lot of it had to do with building a plan and cataloging where we were. It took a lot of tie-in bond money.
yep.
Now, the thing that we've seen just a few months ago is where people doing building actually have to do a permit. It's like a $25 permit for a small project, but it's much larger for bigger projects. So at this point, it is now transformed into, part of that is going to have to be some kind of permitting and monitoring, of applications, which the building departments, it's, kind of in their bailiwick as opposed to the highway department.
And no problem. I just don't know. It seems to be like, it doesn't seem to be a selectman's line item. It seems to be someplace else.
We can put
It's a
that,
work in progress.
yeah, we can move that down. We can move that down to the area where we've got the ambulance and the street lights, and we can make a separate line item down there just to get it out of there.
That's
We
just
could put it under the responsibility of the library. Let them take care of it.
But keep in mind, okay, that we've got $41,000 of that money that's been appropriated over the last couple of years that we haven't spent. Right now, there's $41,000 in I almost said snow and ice, in the stormwater account. Now, I'm sure we'll spend some of that between now and the end of the year, but not 41,000. That $41,000 is going to roll over as an unused appropriation.
That's interesting, Cliff, because the response that we received from the selectmen was that they believe that the stormwater figure should be 47,500, not the 45,000 that we have in the budget. So they're looking for a bump. Even though we're not even close to exhausting the account in the
Right.
current
I know
year.
they have a contract with tie and bond, and how much of that is that contract and how much is other expenses they're expecting, but they have not spent everything that we've appropriated over the last couple of years.
Cliff, how are we allowed to keep moving that money forward? Doesn't it go away at the end of the fiscal year?
Yes, it's an appropriation, Paul. If it was a line item,
Yep.
I'm sorry, if it was a special article
Yep.
outside of the regular budget, those would carry over indefinitely.
So does this carry over or not?
No,
So we don't have any money in that account
This
except
this will fall into free cash if it's not spent by July 1.
right.
Yeah.
That's what I assume. But Cliff seemed to indicate that he's carrying a balance forward.
yes. Yeah, we are carrying right. Well,
So
let me
what you're
put it
really
this way.
doing is accounting for the money, but if we needed more than that, we just couldn't go to that balance without a special transfer or some kind of help from a town meeting, correct?
Which would have to be done before June 30th.
Okay, thanks.
So Cliff, you're saying that of the 61 that was allocated last year, they've only spent 20?
There was a carryover from the previous year that they didn't use too.
So then are we going to accept their 47.5, Doug, or are we just going to stick with the 45?
Well, I've just made a note here. I think we need a clarification of why we're looking for an increase on that account if it looks like we're underspending it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I
and
can
two years in a row.
do a printout of the activity on that and send it to you.
I'm not interested in that. I'm just interested to know if we haven't spent all the money, why are we asking for 2,500 more?
Yeah, I don't get it. But
Well,
It is
I wonder
definitely,
if they're looking at,
Heather.
I wonder if they foresee some more restrictive testing coming or something. So I would ask that question for sure.
I went to a meeting maybe 6 months ago where they presented some of this, and they're only getting started in the requirements. There's going to be more and more requirements coming in the future. So it's a new ballgame. And
Yeah.
one other thing about the management of this, there is a volunteer committee headed by Gary Weiner, and that is in charge of the system. I don't know who he reports to. Does he report to the building inspector or directly to the selectman? I don't know.
I'm
I'm
thinking
not
there's
sure.
big dollar spending coming up with, more testing and bigger rules and all that stuff, but, we don't know that yet, and I wouldn't budget it for it until it happens.
Yeah, my only point is I think this is going to be a growing area of money.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right, Alan, but let's not grow the budget until we need to.
Right.
Right.
All right, we'll request clarification on that.
Mhm.
Moving on to the next item we had was Town Administrator 19.0. And we basically asked for a status on the administrative position, I guess, what the thinking is of the board relative to that position. And the response, I don't know, Carol, you want to summarize the response?
Well, it sounds like they talked to a couple of search firms. They were looking for a part-time town administrator, and not a full-time one as we've had in the past. And the consultants that they talked to said we'd have difficulty doing that. And so they decided not to take any action right now. And then given the current situation, there's been some leeway in terms of allowing current town administrators to work additional hours. Bob, I guess, was restricted in terms of the hours that he could work. I didn't think that was legislative. I thought that was related to something else. But and so, I don't think they're gonna be doing much on this, but they thought that we should keep the 100,000 in there as a placeholder. But if they're really not ever interested in a full-time town administrator, I don't know why we would keep 100 in there.
Why are we all of a sudden not wanting a full-time town administrator?
I don't know.
We're going backwards.
Right. Right.
Thank you.
Oh, Heather, look how much everything's tightened up.
Come on.
I know. If there was ever
We
a time,
fought for this, and now they want to go back. That's we agreed. The town agreed to spend that money for a full-time town administrator. I don't know why they think this now.
yeah, and
Well, we can
Clifton,
ask what the rationale is.
yeah,
We ought to be doing exactly what Heather said, and we ought to be moving forward with the change in our charter to give the town administrator some authority so we can actually have an administrator running the town on a 24/7 basis.
That's called a town manager.
Call it what you want.
Yeah.
The rule change that they're referring to is a ruling by PERIC, which is the state pension organization.
okay,
That people who are collecting pensions are, because of the current crisis, are not as strictly limited to the number of hours that they work.
Right.
Seeing that letter on my desk this morning when I came in and reading this would lead me to believe that we will be spending more for our current town administrator going forward.
What is our contract with him? How is there a deadline, or is it just whenever the selectmen decide they don't need him anymore?
I can't answer that. I know he has been billing us for 20 hours a week, probably working more than that. And as I put the pieces together, I think that probably has more to do with the pension situation than anything else. But I wouldn't be surprised to see that expense go up because he's now able to work more hours as needed if they want him to.
Yeah, I thought it was a 6-month contract, wasn't it?
yeah, but that was a long time ago, Doug.
More than 6 months ago.
Yeah, yeah,
Most state employees who are actually even the town is with the county government. Your opportunity to start another career or getting more money from a Massachusetts municipality is limited. And there's certain formulas that each of the pensions have of how much you can earn.
But that's what I'm saying, Paul. That's been
Yeah,
suspended.
I'm just agreeing with you.
Right, okay.
Just agreeing with you. Just to let people know, like, I personally, for me, I can do other things not I can do things in Connecticut, for example,
Right.
without it affecting my pension. But if I do anything in Massachusetts, I have to be careful of how much I earn.
Good
You
thing.
may
you-
have to cut your salary, huh?
If I have a salary and you can find it, and you can cut it, then Alan.
Now, Carol, are they projecting paying this additional $10,000 to Bob now, starting in July? Or is this just something that they have that they can talk about in terms of moving forward with the replacement?
I'm not sure I quite understand your question, Cliff, but the sense I got from the response was that they're going to be able to use Bob more because he's been freed up to do more hours, as Dick was
Okay,
saying.
well, that's my question. If he's gonna work more, he should get paid more.
Yeah, but I don't think, the response didn't lead me to believe that they ultimately want a full-time town administrator, although they're asking us to keep $100,000 in the budget. So there's some disconnect for me in terms of the
Right.
response and then that $100,000. So I think we just need to clarify what their more long-term intention is.
I think we go back and we ask for the rationale for going from full-time to part-time, and a clarification of if we're going part-time, why is it the 100,000 being carried?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
All right, anybody have anything else on that? Okay. The next item we have was 29.0, office equipment. These were 29.3, there was a request for 10,000, and 29.6 was the website. We had the question of the $2,500 for the website and whether or not that was being carried. And the explanation leads me to believe that they want us to hold that 10,000 for expenses. Then the answer says there is no issue with adding a separate line item for website. I'm not sure.
Well, that was new because the website wasn't anywhere before. We said that we would want to add a separate line, and he was fine with that. But the supplies at 10 grand, they to date, well, just under 3,000 has been spent. He's been told they typically have a big order at the end of the year, which appears to have been about $3,000, but that still doesn't add up to 10. And according to Cliff, the last couple of years have only been somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000. So the jump to 10,000 seems pretty significant without a sense of what you might need.
Yeah. So absent an explanation, maybe we reduce that to 8.
I mean, yeah, maybe even further than that. If he's saying that there's about 3,000 now, maybe they anticipate maybe 3,500, but it seems like a huge jump without knowing what supplies that's talking about. I mean, if we're gonna just kind of, want to scrimp and save a few thousand, I mean, I think we could probably put that down to even 5. They haven't been spending 5.
Well,
Unless it can
except that
do
also
with-
impacts on the free cash. I mean, it is good to have a little bit of leeway in these budgets, so that the free cash builds.
Yeah, but I
And if
think,
we under budget it, then we're going to have to transfer out of another line.
right, I think we should push back and just say what it's a big difference between what he's told us in terms of $6,500 versus 10,000.
Right.
You know.
I think
It's a lot of paper clips or whatever it is that they're.
Well, there's a key line in there, and again, I want to be careful. Line accounts are set up so that you're to spend that money within the current fiscal year for things you need in the fiscal year. If at the end of the year, they're either, if they're replacing what they use, that's one thing, but if they're buying in anticipation of next year, that's another.
Mhm.
So I just think that there may be a historical pattern here, but I do agree if the numbers don't seem to add up to 10,000.
So we'll do a little bit more homework on that one.
I will say to ease your concerns a little, Paul, I have not noticed a lot of last month of the year use it or lose it type thinking in town anymore. Yeah, they may bring in a big load of paper, as long as there's money in the budget. Might as well do it now because it'll save us for next year.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say, Dick. There's a smart way to do that, and then there's a wasteful way. And I was trying to be careful. I don't know the answer, but I'm not saying I've never done it before because I know I have. But there's a smart way to do it, but the bottom line is that the history shows that at least for a couple of years that they have never reached the $10,000 number.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you. I think that maybe the 10 might be too high, but I'm pretty comfortable with the way they've been spending it. I'm a pretty cheap guy.
I know you are.
All right.
All right. Tree warden was the next item we had, 41.0.
So this was about whether we should really be pulling those additional gypsy moth expenses out in an article rather than embed it into the operating budget. And Don's response was that they would discuss it at their meeting tomorrow, and he'd get the board's opinion on that.
Yeah, I think at some point we're going to have a combined meeting of the board so that we can, have some interaction on these issues. But there's just too many little decisions to
Right.
do the 1 week exchanges.
Yeah.
So bottom line is that we don't know yet on the tree warden, although it does have the 29,000 additional for traffic control in the budget request.
Right. And that would probably have to come out into the article because I think that's related to the gypsy moth stuff.
Right. That's my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
There is some advantage to this method, though, as long as we have the time, Doug. It does give their board a chance to huddle and figure out exactly what they want to do, and it gives you a chance to prompt the things that they need to make decisions on.
Right.
So it's not all bad. Sometimes in a joint meeting, the first person who speaks up sounds like a policy. It might not be.
Exactly. I understand, but this may be the only advantage of pushing back town meeting is that it does give a little bit more time to work these issues through.
Yep.
Do we have a date for town meeting, by the way? Tentative date?
15th.
It is June 15th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oops. That could be a problem.
Next item was 43.0, highway maintenance and the paving. And the question really was, should we keep the paving in the operating budget or break it out in a separate article? In previous years, we had done a debt exclusion vote of 2.5 overrides for the paving. But what we have discussed in the last few years is trying to build a certain amount into this so that we don't have to be looking at overrides. And the response that we received was that they would prefer to keep this 250 in the operating budget. Speaking for myself, if we can do it, I think it makes a lot of sense to do that because it is, a regular expense of the town. We're always going to have these repairs that need to be done.
I would also infer from that response, I know Alan mentioned last week, is that enough money? And it seems to me the highways department superintendent from that response is perfectly happy with what he's asked for.
All right, he's probably going to get nicked on the, on his state money.
Maybe.
We know how much he spent so far? I didn't hear that.
I don't have expenses to date on that, Paul.
And that one's a tough one to measure unless you know what he's got planned because of the seasonality of the paving system. It's not like you can say, well, 3/4 are done, he should be spent 75%.
Does he identify the streets that he wants to do every year, or is it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's obvious. I don't mean to be facetious, but that's more than pothole money. So it's got to be major streets that he's doing for that kind of money. So does he give the selectmen, here's the 6 streets I want to do over?
Yeah,
Yes, he does. Yeah.
he has
and
he has a very extensive list,
Right.
going out several years of the, the planned paving.
Yeah.
And
One of the,
because he spends so much money in July, August, and September, he also provides me with a document near the end of the year so that I can project cash flow. What projects he's going to be doing when, because it can be a couple $100,000 hit all of a sudden.
one of the worst places in town that needs help right now is exactly in front of Don Davenport's house. There's a wearing away of the road there, but there's huge drainage problems there that require some very aggressive care.
Wasn't that Vinnie Mandolini's neighborhood?
Yes, it was.
Is this Cliff's new house or his old one?
I'm sorry?
Is this Cliff's new house?
No. Don Davenport's house. the
Don's,
selectman's
is this
house, yeah.
Don's new house? Or
Yeah,
Don's
and
old?
if he asked for that to be fixed, he'd be well within his rights, believe me. There's Lake Oak Knoll in front of his house when it rains,
Oh, jeez.
Okay.
and the road
That's
is
not
all,
his house anymore, though. He moved.
not Don.
No,
Don's
you're
still,
right. Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, I have not seen the list of, the project list for this year.
Mm.
I mean, I'm sure it's available. Mark is, very, very available if anybody wants to approach him on those.
Of course, what the project list is depending on how much money you give him.
And I would think with oil prices being what they are, that the asphalt prices are going to drop pretty considerably.
Boy, that'd be nice.
All right.
Everybody all set on paving?
Yep.
The next item was 48.0 building expenses. And this was the building expenses for the DPW facility. With the anticipation of the addition going on, the question was whether or not carrying the same utilities was going to be adequate. And the response was yes, for the time being, until they have some experience with that, with the new building. But they also responded that there was an additional $6,000 for street sweeping, which needs to go in.
I think that was already
Related to the stormwater.
Yeah.
Ah,
Right. Yeah, we have to do a fall cleanup, or spring and fall.
But I think that was already included in our projection. So it came in at 16.8 and we put it in at 22.8. So I think we
all
already.
right, so we've already built the 6 in.
Yeah. Yep.
This damn stormwater thing, we're gonna have the best outflows.
Well, at least we'll know what they are.
All right, the
If
next,
anybody asked that question at town meeting, you're it.
yeah. The next item we had was fire department, 53.0. And there's a question about the emergency medical supplies, whether or not the $3,000 would be necessary if we sign the ambulance contract. And the response was that yes, that should continue to be included. There's also a question of whether or not there would be a reduction in the fire department response expenses with, a contracted ambulance, and the response is that they don't expect any reduction in those response expenses.
Yeah.
I suspect this is another one of these things we're going to need some experience to know what in fact it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, the implication is that the fire will go out on every call that there's an ambulance.
Yeah.
So
And
that,
I have to assume that's one of those things that it's going to take a while for a protocol to develop between the fire department and the ambulance.
yeah, I think last time we were hoping that $65,000 in call reimbursement could come down a little bit from that, but they're saying no.
Well,
So-
that's a management decision by the selectmen.
Mhm.
They manage that department.
Right. So for our purposes, we should carry the 3,000 for emergency medical supplies and the 65 for compensation and get some experience.
So the question is, because that EMS supplies was kind of floating in their request, it wasn't attached to a certain line, what do we think the best line to add that 3,000 to is? Is it really equipment? Should we add it to equipment, or do you have a preference, Cliff?
I don't have it in front of me, but now let me back up. Is it medical supplies or is that the medical director?
No, it's supplies. We're not paying for the medical director anymore.
That's what I thought.
So these are, when they put their request in, I can find it, they had
Okay.
kind of this, it wasn't attached to an account, it just was said EMS supplies, 3,000. And it said they wouldn't be needed if the fire department ambulance proposal was accepted. Since it wasn't, we need to now include it here.
Okay.
I'm just not sure where you
Yeah.
want to see it.
Well, as far as what you're looking at there, it would just be a 5.3, I think is their codes, 5.3?
Yep.
5.3 point, whatever the next available number is.
Or do you want to just put it in 5.3.4 equipment?
I would not put in equipment. Equipment, and Cliff can help me out here, but supplies is one thing. Equipment indicates another thing in a budget. Supplies are ongoing. Equipment usually is, sometimes it's a one-time purchase or whatever.
A
So I don't
replacement,
think-
yeah, replacement of something that's gone out.
So I would do what Cliff just said, give it a 5.3 point something.
Okay. So it'll actually be a 5,
They also have an operational
like
expense line.
9.1 or something. It's good. The last one is,
Yeah, it does say operations. If you don't want to create another line, it could go there, but I'm more in favor of putting a supply line in. You can keep better.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between equipment and supplies. I mean, it's a difference between a hammer and a nail. I mean,
Right.
So, but is there a difference between what is the operational expenses line, which is $48,000 used for? Is that,
My only argument there, Dick, is that there again, it's another number that would go in, and how many things are in that one line? Right?
okay,
That's on my only thing. It's, you can track a supply line a lot better than you can adding to that $48,000 and then want to know what's in that line.
it would be kind of nice if we're going to add a line that, Cliff can work on this going forward, but that I'd love to see a line that would kind of track all the expenses, operational expenses and supplies for the medical side, as opposed to the fire side.
right, because it looks like we're going in that direction where, I mean, it's basically two different services now that are within the fire department. And I mean, if there's going to be this medical piece of it being developed, then it does make sense to break out the expenses.
Well, if we have our own ambulance in town through the company they've already contracted with, the question is, if you get a medical call and they're right in town, why do you need a fire department to also respond? That's the base question, really.
well, we basically asked that question, Alan, and they said they would still the board said that they would still expect the fire department to respond in that situation.
Okay.
So Cliff, we'll come up with a separate line for that EMS supplies.
Yeah, what's the next one? 5.3,
Well, it's you've got 539 is the last one.
okay, 5.310. That'll be for the town meeting and your purposes. I'll have to assign another number to track it as far as the software goes.
Well, as far as the 5.3 is, it's a 5.35 is the last number here, or no, 5.36.
Let's let Cliff look at the accounts and do that later.
Yeah.
Sure.
Cliff,
That's a pretty confusing set of accounts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
okay, are we going back to the selectmen and ask them to break out their entire medical budget from their operational budget?
I don't think so yet. I mean, I think for purposes of this equipment request that we have the separate line, and then on a going forward basis, we may have to do, more discrimination, but
Yeah.
I
Okay,
think for purposes of this request, we just need this one line.
okay, gotcha.
Next item, 57.0, Police Department. We had a question on the chief's salary. We had obtained a copy of the chief's contract, and I believe everybody received a copy of that.
I didn't.
You did not, Alan?
I did not, no.
No?
The only thing I saw was some minor correction to that.
No,
Well-
the first page was the amendment, and then further into the document is the actual contract.
Right, the attachment had about 8 or 10 pages on it, Alan.
Okay, I probably just didn't look far enough. My
And then,
mistake.
and then Dick sent through the expenses of the current year and the last year in the compensation line. I don't know if anybody's had a chance to look at that yet.
I
Yep.
have,
I mean, I just looked at it quickly. I had not in a way to discuss it in any intelligent way. So I'll leave it to others if you want to comment tonight.
Well, I think it's, if our goal is to have the budget more accurately reflect the full salary and kind of pull all the component parts out. Now, because the chief's salary and the director's salary, the kind of department head salaries are separate from their staffs. I do think it is reasonable to show all of the police chief expenses maybe in one area. We could still talk about them as, the salary and then his, career incentive, what's formerly known as the Quinn bill, separate.
I think it should all be together showing, every department should have the costs associated definitely showing in the department. So all of his expenses and his salary or whatever else he's getting should be in that police department budget.
Cliff or Dick, do either of you know why the budget developed in the format that it has, where the salary is one item and the career incentive and the emergency management are in other lines?
It's actually a historical issue because at one time we got reimbursement for Quinn. The state reimbursed our Quinn expenses. We no longer get any Quinn expenses. So there is absolutely no valid reason I don't know of anything. I don't think there's a mandate that the police track that. I think Jeff is about 1,700 a week in his regular pay and 380 or 390 in his Quinn. And I think he got 2,500 from, these are numbers off the top of my head, about 2,500 from emergency management. So, you can just include everything right in his pay.
what's emergency management, just a curiosity?
It's
Well,
a
I
line
know
item
that-
in your budget for about $8,000, and they give some of it to him as just salary for, I guess, running the program.
Right, but then they also make sure that supplies are up to date for hurricanes and stuff like that. But I think last year that we spent about $6,800 out of that account, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, in his contract, there's an exhibit that shows his emergency management responsibilities, responding, coordinating, efforts, communication, liaisoning with National Grid and Columbia Gas and, these other things. There's like 9 things that are listed in terms of emergency management responsibilities.
Wouldn't that be part of his job?
Yeah, well, it just depends on how you negotiate your contract.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
I also believe that there's money that he gets that's not reflected in that answer from the selectmen. It may be buybacks or something like that, sick time buybacks.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, because if you read the contract, it's pretty significant, and the liability for the town if he leaves or when he retires is huge.
I don't have he's been doing substantial sick time buybacks. The way that the detail is presented to both Cliff and I can't tie every dollar to every account. That's not the way they've submitted it. They do it in parallel systems. And actually, Mr. Davenport asked for the same information, and I told him that Kathy Zanetti has a program that she uses to track payroll and what causes all these payroll for every officer. And I've had her run reports in the past that give a very good idea of where every dollar comes from. They break it down in bizarre ways so they can track the reason for the cost. And getting that report might be more insightful to the total compensation package over a period of time.
Do you have a sense of what the sick time accumulation is at this point?
I have no way of knowing that.
I know he's hit it a couple of times.
It's a human resource thing, and it's all depends upon how people are allowed to access it. So
Right.
my experience has been, at least in my field, is that there is, you access it when you retire, or if there's a special circumstances, if you leave. In some cases, you can lose it all if you just take another job someplace else, versus retiring. But I don't know the history or the process that is found in typical police chiefs' salary contracts. So it sounds as though that not only maybe, I haven't read the patrolman's contract either, but it sounds as though that you can access some of your unused days on a yearly basis.
Mhm.
So let's say that he gets 15 sick days a year and he only uses 10. In some cases, you have to take that 5 and you carry it over. And then when you retire, you can collect it on a percentage basis. It looks as though the possibility exists under either the collective bargaining agreement for the patrolman or for the chief, that they can either carry it over or they can cash it in at the end of the year. So it all depends upon how the contract is written.
And I will say, a couple of years ago, I asked a question about the manner in which he was getting sick time buyback because, well, whatever. And the answer I got was that town council and his council were involved in settling that decision. So it's not like something that just wasn't paid attention to.
Right.
They put some significant, the previous Board of Selectmen put some significant effort into figuring out what the contract said.
Right.
Because there was a dispute.
You even have, I mean, I know in the teacher's contract in Hampden, Wilbraham, they unused sick time, they're allowed to accumulate up to a certain point. And then if they don't use it, there's a percentage of what they can access it back. And I can tell you out of transparency that when I retired, I did cash in some unused sick time and unused vacation time.
And if there is an amendment to the contracts that's just dated in June of 2019, where those provisions were kind of refreshed. And so it's definitely there. He can get 75% of the accumulation.
Right. I think that would be hard to budget and put in a line item, but I would argue that if he does get a percentage for the Quinn bill, it ought to be separated out from the Quinn bill number that probably includes all of the patrolmen in town. And I would probably argue that if he gets a stipend for emergency management, if it's not part of his job and it's not rolled into his contract and it's going to get kept separate, it should be in a separate line account. I wouldn't argue on the other benefits. That would be too hard.
Yeah, I agree, Paul. I think that we should have the chief's salary, his kind of direct, compensation, and then his indirect compensation. The other two lines should be carved out so that people can see the total amount.
I'm not looking to cut the salary. I'm not looking to cut his benefits. I'm just
wanted to be transparent. And, I do know that, when we were trying to support the town administrator salary, people were pretty outraged at, the $100,000 figure. And, I think I said at town meeting one of the town meetings that, that this is not the most highly compensated position in town. And I don't think people knew that because it's not obvious. which one is. So I just think I think it's about transparency. I'm not saying it's not justified. I'm just saying it needs to be clear.
So for our purposes, we can combine the compensation in the salary line item. It's not going to affect the overall budget. It's just the presentation is different.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Either that, or I would have his salary, and then I have a point something line that says Quinn bill, and then I'd have a point whatever, for the emergency management. But
Yeah,
I would not go any deeper into healthcare benefits.
No. I'm just talking in terms of, straight compensation. The
Right.
buyout stuff, Paul, generally comes out of the employee benefits line. I mean,
Yeah.
That's where buyouts come from.
Yeah, I wouldn't touch
It all
that.
just gets mushed together, which,
No,
my
I
opinion is
I wouldn't
horrible.
do that because it's an optional thing. But
Right.
the two
Right.
things that aren't optional, or the three things are, one is his base salary, and two would be Quinn, and three would be he's getting additional dollars for the emergency management, which to me should be rolled into his total compensation, but that's another story.
So is everybody in agreement that we'll roll those numbers together?
Yeah. I mean, I think I want to see them as separate lines, like Paul is saying,
Mhm.
like under the police chief's salary. I mean, I would want to see them broken out.
So basically, you're going to have salary, educational incentive, and then emergency management stipend.
Yep.
That's what I'd like to see. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
The second part of the police issue involved dispatch, and obviously we don't have an answer on that. I'm not sure it makes sense for us to spend any more time on that until the board makes a decision.
Mhm. Yep.
Anybody want to add anything in there?
No, I think we just wait and see what they're going to do with it.
Right, let's see what direction they go, and then we'll weigh in. And then the last item we had was on the Board of Assessors clerical. And there was a question of whether or not the increase of 5% on the salary had been supported by the board as advocated by the assessors. And
We didn't get a response on that.
I'm wondering if it cut off on my printer or we didn't get a response.
No, I didn't see it.
I didn't see it.
No, that looks like Don is kicking that to Bob to answer, and we haven't got an answer yet.
All right.
Or
Yeah.
maybe we should re-ask that question to Bob.
Well, what I did though, Dick, I mean, I sent this request to Bob and to Don, and maybe, Bob just didn't read down to see that there was something for him. But we'll revisit it since we have some other outstanding questions.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our list of questions.
There are a couple more I think that we need to talk about under school. You had a question about them trying to put something in addition to assessment and by a separate line that Wilbraham wanted to have. Have you come to any conclusion or what we should do in that, Doug?
Well, I mean, my position hasn't changed. The school committee voted a number. They sent an assessment letter to the town, and that's what we carry in the budget. The fact that they may be looking to add additional funds with a separate vote, unless and until they do something, we don't do anything. There is nothing.
They haven't decided whether that's going to fly or not. Is that what you're saying?
I have no idea what they're planning to do. I don't know.
And if they go that way, how much money was that approximately for us?
Well, it was an additional vote. Carol, do you remember it was a 275 from Wilbraham and about 70 from us?
Right, so the impact would be an additional, well, yeah, so 70. So ours went down by almost 20. We said it net would be up by about 51. I think.
No, it went down by 50. It would go up by 20.
Oh, okay.
If that goes through, would you propose a line item for that or just roll it into the assessment?
You know what, Alan, I don't want to speculate on it unless and until something happens.
Okay. Then the other thing I had was under the debt. Dick had proposed that we put in just the $8,765, which is, I guess, interest if we don't pay it, and keep the full items there on police and dump truck. He has several ways to treat that, and I don't think he made a decision on that yet. What do you feel, Dick? The way it's shown on all the budgets recently is that police radio is of some $713,000 and change, and the dump truck 248, and put it under debt. And is that the full amount that we owe or now need to owe on those two items?
Okay, the 317 and change and the 248 is the amount, when you add those two together, is the amount of the note that we took out. It is one note that covers both of those items. So personally, I would put one line item that says short-term debt and in parentheses, police radio and dump truck, so people understand what it is. At minimum, my suggested path is at minimum at the annual town meeting, appropriate that interest number that I gave you, because we have to pay that even if we don't pay off anything else. And then assuming that we don't know, we don't have money falling from heaven by June 15th, wait until September to go back and decide how much of the debt we want to pay down.
So Dick, you're going to have I think that's a good plan, but can you sort of have that, I'm not saying doing it tomorrow, please, but could you sort of have that plan written out? So what would your number be for next fall? What would your number be for next June? So then we know when it's going to be done.
Well, okay, the email I sent, I thought I sent it to all of you. Pretty Mills has the two data points. I mean, it's a spring note. It's like March 1st.
Right.
The note. So I don't need to know how much principal we're going to pay down. I do. Alan just had the number. Was it $8,500 in interest?
Right. I remember seeing that. Right.
We have to pay.
$8,765 is what you recommended.
We have to pay that.
Recommend for the fall. Let's say everything stays the same. We're able to take care of whatever shortfalls. What are you going to recommend for the fall?
I would love to see at a minimum a 3-year payoff on this.
That's pretty much what I'm asking.
Okay.
Third, yeah.
Yeah, I would say as a minimum. However, we've got a couple of balls in the air. We need to know how much free cash we have in the fall. We'd like to put some money back in stabilization that we took out last year. We took out 300,000, and we've got paying down the debt. And you juggle those three numbers at when you go into September and figure out what you want, what is an acceptable tax rate increase. So that's kind of gives us that one more variable.
Okay, I guess. All right.
But I like the 3 years.
Okay, so that's all I kind of needed to know. So we're talking a couple $100,000, well, $175,000 a year for the next 3 years, right?
Paul, until we get to the fall, well, actually, until we get to the free cash certification, which usually happens in late summer, we're really not in a position to make those decisions. I mean, we've had some good free cash in the past several years, which has given us a lot of flexibility when it comes to what type of applications to make.
Yeah, I wasn't asking for an exact number. I was only looking for like what's in Dick's mind for a target, and that's all I was looking for.
A plan.
Aspirational.
Right. Yep. No, that's okay. I mean, if you don't make it, but you get close to it, and then that's fine. And I don't have a problem with that at all.
And if you guys do such an awesome job that we've got all this extra money, we could pay it all off this year.
You mean if we do?
Yes.
Yes, there you go.
Okay, so my question is, what do we put under in the debt? Did we put these full amounts of the 317 and 248, or do we put
No.
put in the 8,000?
8,000.
Put in the interest, but we make note of the full amount of debt.
Yeah.
So that people understand that this is outstanding.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, if you wanted to put it in the requested for the total amount and the recommended for the interest only, that gives you an opportunity to explain that we'll talk about this in the fall.
Right. I think that makes sense. We certainly don't want people to think that those expenses have been met. And they're hanging out there.
Right. Have we heard anything about what they might be going for in terms of special articles? Any money coming out of those for any specific items?
Cliff, I have not heard any. I have not heard of any articles.
I haven't either.
For
I guess that's a
what are you
question we
talking
can
about
put to
for
them.
annual town meeting?
Yeah, we got one draft a little while ago.
Yeah,
Um,
and I've reviewed that and I don't see anything very big in that whole thing. The highway department had some money for,
it was a truck.
no, it was auxiliary equipment on one of their trucks and where is that?
Well,
But
the one I have, talked about a highway truck replacement at no more than $46,000, but that was like the big money issue, school reserve
Yeah.
office, that looked
But
the
this is
same.
a separate thing. Article 14, highway truck, oh, they talk about replacement, but they asking for money to put a snowplow on a truck and they're asking for like $46,864. Now that's the biggest one I see in this. We've got some little ones like the school resource officer is small. Usually there's some money on accessors to establish funds for them. I don't understand, but it's not very big.
Hey,
Well,
Hey,
now
can you
we'll
guys,
ask them to clarify that so that we have a more current understanding of where the articles stand.
Doug, do you think you could get the assessors to stop this in and out thing? It's ridiculous.
Oh, on the,
Put
On their-
14,000 in and take 9,500 out. It's silly. Make a net appropriation.
yeah, that's a discussion that I think is worth having. I mean, when that started, it made sense because they were looking at a pretty substantial cost. And this was a way to even it out, and it made sense, but the amount seemed to have moderated.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's nowhere near the amount of money that it used to be. They were worried about a 3-year valuation cost.
Yeah.
Well, it's now a 5-year anyways, but they're just not using that money.
Okay. All right. I'll ask Norm where that stands. And I take it, Cliff, that that's a fair amount of additional accounting that has to go on to accomplish that.
I would want to say it's a fair amount of accounting. It's an aggravation. And then Dick has to move the money in and out as well. In fact, we're just actually, did you get the email I sent Dick on the transfers?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, we're doing that this week.
It's 14 manual accounting entries, and they're taxing money and putting it in the bank for next year. And it's such an insignificant amount of money. But, I complained about this for 3 years, got nowhere, and I've shut up for the last 2 years.
So Dick, it sounds like you're joining in this request.
Mhm.
I'm reminding you that I tried to die on this hill and got killed.
All right, we'll go back to them on that. Okay, anybody have anything else?
Do we know?
I just wanted to thank Cliff for putting those lines in the budget. Cliff, thanks.
Oh, you're welcome.
Do we have any idea of what may crop up on the October meeting as far as capital is concerned? There's 2 things that were hanging, I think. One is a possible addition to the senior center, but I talked with Cliff on that, who's on that committee, and he doesn't see that happening. And the other one is the fire department has been in the past holding out that they got to expand the building to put in a new tanker truck. And I haven't heard anything at all on that, but those are the only items I've heard talking about. Anybody else have any idea what else might come up?
The fire department discussion is the only thing I've heard, and that's a little complicated because it also has to do with air quality and the exhaust fans and when they start the trucks inside, and that's a big component of that. But they don't seem to have Bob Marco mentioned it a couple of meetings ago, but it didn't sound like they had their hands around it right now.
Well, they've had somebody in that we appropriated the money for with respect to the RFP.
Yeah.
There has been somebody in the building working on that.
So it's moving forward such as it is. I suspect that until the chief situation is settled, that nothing further is going to happen there.
That's true.
And it's hard to get anything accomplished right now.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, I don't see any need to push that issue. I think the most important is the personnel side. You know, let's get the chief in place, get the personnel lined up, and then we'll have a team in place to work with in terms of discussing these issues.
All right.
Board of Selectmen keep saying they want to do some more budget reviews. Are they asked to do a review with us on items other than their own?
No, we haven't gotten any requests, and we haven't gotten any change in anyone's initial budget. They submitted a couple of different numbers, but everything else has come in, as it was, 2 months ago.
Yeah, I think what we're going to have to do is, we'll probably have to do one more run through our numbers and then request a joint meeting with the select board and then go through it with them.
Mhm.
And, address any discrepancies that come up.
And I'm wondering for our next meeting, if Monday's a little bit too ambitious. I'm wondering if we need 2 weeks to get some of these things cleared up, especially if they're not meeting until tomorrow, and then, we'll have some idea of the dispatch. I don't know if we'll get a turnaround on some of this information in time for Monday.
You don't like spending your Monday nights with us?
I just want them to be productive.
No, I'm fine with 2 weeks out. We can put these questions out to them. Let's get some responses. We'll ask Kristen to post it for 2 weeks from tonight. And I think it probably makes sense to also request at the same time, we'll request a meeting with the select board so that, that gets on the calendar and we'll all be working towards it.
And I also think, you and I, Doug, can work with Kristen on just to make sure that our sheets are lined up, to look at, what Cliff's done, just to make sure everything's, as it's supposed to be, so that we just really have something really finely tuned for our next meeting.
Right. And the other issue that we have to go back to Kristen on is the response time from the printer.
Right.
With regards to the timing of our public hearing.
Yeah, the last I spoke to her, she was going to need to go out to Marcus to see if they could turn the documents around quicker. It didn't look like Eagle was going to be able to do it for us in the 4-day turnaround time. So she was going to get in touch with Marcus and see what they could accomplish.
All right.
Are you thinking of using the historical data going forward in the end up green sheets? Or again, I've changed the format completely, but I never changed the original.
Cliff, you mean the published green sheets?
Yeah, and the published green sheets, are you going to use the actual numbers of disbursements like I indicated, or go back to the net?
Well, last week we talked about that being kind of our internal working document so that we have a reference to ask the questions.
Yeah,
So
I never touched the original green sheet. That's a revised version. That is just my working copy.
Yep.
I think for purposes of consistency, if we continue to do it the way that we've done it, it makes it more accurate to compare one year to the last. If we start changing the way that we're representing the numbers, then it's going to make it difficult to have any type of a real assessment of these things.
Okay.
I'll put a word in for the more years that you can give these voters the trend line, the smarter they're going to be. So, if it's just a matter of if it's possible to keep an extra year of data in there, and we know the data is valuable.
Oh, I can go back and change it. I can go back and change it on the ultimate green sheets. I can go back and add 18 and have it be the net amount. That's not an issue. That's not a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think that column with those new line items is totally irrelevant to anybody but Cliff, really. So that I don't think
Thanks a lot.
Not that you're not important,
No,
but I don't think for public presentation, nobody sees any the value in that.
And nobody asked a single question about it. So.
And so if we can use a column for one more year of history, that would maybe make sense in the final version that goes out.
I like the way you people are thinking.
One other thing, I did a little bottom line here to see what things look like. And the sheets we got from Kristen today have the total of 15,266,000. I put in, if dispatch is passed, the savings we would have, or the expense we would have this year. No, pardon me, the savings we would have this year were 227,000, giving us a total of 15,038. And that compares with the revenue estimate that Cliff put together of 15,431. So we'd have $392,000 of more than expense. And then if you go with Dick's suggestion and put in only that $8,765 of interest for the police and trucks, and take away the 317,000 that's on the sheets now and the 248,000 that's on the sheet, that would come up to having a grand total of 14,482,000, and that would be $949,000 more than of revenue, more than expense.
Yeah, but that's your numbers aren't wrong.
That doesn't include any things that come up as articles in the
Right.
budget. But we should review that budget to see what it is. I don't think it's going to be nearly as much as we've had in previous years.
Don't forget, Alan, it still boils down to what's the tax rate going to be. And just because you've got those revenues and those expenditures, those revenues have got to come from somewhere, and they're going to come from the tax rate. So last year, the only reason why we ended up with the tax rate we had is we used $300,000 of our savings. So it's all going to boil down to in November when we sit down to say, what can we live with?
Well, we already know how many taxes are going to happen in the fall, because that's on the basis of the new tax that we passed last year.
That's cash flow. That's not taxes, Alan. That's only cash flow. Cliff, your revenue projections, are they based on an increase in the property taxes?
Only the $170,000 that the assessors are saying is available.
Okay. Alan, I think you're trying to get a little too close with numbers that are a little too vague.
I'm just using the numbers we have on the sheets.
I sent, I'll resend it. I have a format that I use that basically parallel, and Dick and I do it differently, but we both parallel the recap sheet to determine what the ultimate tax rate, and you can look at it and see what we did last year and start putting in numbers for this year. Don't forget, ultimately, we got to know what the valuations are that we're going to have.
Right.
That we don't know. So I know what you're saying, Alan. It looks like we have enough money to do what we want, and we do if we don't care about the tax rate.
We have, if I might, we have enough capacity.
Yes.
There's no question we have enough capacity, but that's not the same as a tax rate. I mean, to achieve this at the full funding would be an incredibly high tax increase, which I don't think anybody is willing to support. So let's wait until we get this a little bit more refined. We'll work the numbers a little bit more closely, and we won't be setting the rate until the special meeting in the fall anyway. So, I mean, please don't tell people we have the money, because we don't. We have the capacity to fund the budget.
And we're not willing to spend that capacity.
Can I just ask a question? There was a few budgets going around. Alan just mentioned 15 million something. There was one email had two budgets, and one had the 15 million, one had 14.8. Which one's got some yellow marks to it and the other one doesn't? Which one is the one that we're using, the 15.2?
Which one do you like, Paul?
Just trying to find out which one we're all talking about.
So
Kristen sent out one today, and it's dated today's date.
I got one email that came out today that had two budgets in it.
Oh,
yeah, so one of those, Paul, one of those is the one that Kristen did with a couple of edits we had, and that is the one, the bottom line number is of the draft recommendations,
15.2.
15,265, yeah.
So the 14.8 is not a good one. Okay.
It's just, it doesn't include some of the things that we had talked about last week, so that's the one. The
Incomplete.
one that shows Cliff's historical columns,
Yep.
don't pay attention to the bottom line on that one right now.
No, there's stuff that's not included in there, like the 25,000
All right.
advisory amount, so.
But on the- on
Now,
the- with the
is
15
Kristen going to start using Cliff's new format and get rid of those numbers?
So we'll talk to her about
Okay.
modifying her sheet, adding a year of history instead of the line items.
All right.
Okay,
So
Yeah.
she can
Well-
take that from Cliff's,
okay. If she'll send me, what I could do is work, pardon me for interrupting, Dick, but if I can work from the one she just sent, unless you want to make some changes, but when she does make the changes that you're going to give her, if she sends them to me, then I'll put in the historical numbers the way we want them, just the way they have been, not the way I've been doing it. And that's the only change we'll make. I'll eliminate the numbers down that are my numbers. Those are all for convenience for me, because my accounts aren't set up according to the way the green sheets are set up.
yeah.
So long story short, if she'll send me what the changes are you give her, I'll modify it accordingly.
Okay, so we'll get her to update the green sheets, then send it to you for your, and then you'll get it back to her and she will have the master copy. I just want there to be
Right.
one master copy
Right.
floating
Right,
around.
right. But, and I won't make any changes to her numbers.
Right. We've asked Kristen to keep the master.
So let me ask a question, going back to an original question I had way back a few hours ago. Town meeting, Dick, is scheduled for the 15th of April, of
June.
June.
Do people think realistically we're going to be going in that 15th of June?
I don't.
I don't think we're gonna be able to have gatherings of that big a crowd by June 15th.
I don't
Person.
think so either. I don't think even if we use the church, we could socially distance ourselves enough to have enough people come to the town meeting.
No, we'll be in 1/12 budget and do a final in the fall.
That's what I figured, Cliff. Thanks.
Yeah, so there's gonna have to be some modification.
It would be a 1/12 budget of our expenses expenses for 2020.
Yep.
Right. But Dick, have you heard anything from the state level or other people, I have a friend of mine, one of my colleagues, and he's got a town meeting on that same night, and we're supposed to be at a school board meeting that night. And so I don't think any of the meetings, the school board might work because that we can control the number of people to that meeting, but
No, I haven't heard anything official from the state at all. I've been watching all 5 of the New England states because we put on, organization I belong to, we put on events that have, 700-800 people at them. And I'm looking, the next one we're canceling is Memorial Day in New Hampshire that weekend. And I'm looking at the one in mid-June in Connecticut and thinking that one's probably not going to fly either. So I don't expect to be doing anything until July,
okay.
but I might be wrong.
No, I don't think you're really wrong, but so I just was curious to see what your thoughts were, because when I asked about when the date was, I was just thought it was interesting. So,
Well, the work's got to be done. All we can do is plan with the information we have.
Right. Everybody's going to have to be flexible here over the next several months because we're in uncharted territory.
right. Well, the good news is on a 1/12 budget, not a lot happens in July and August, anyways.
Well, there's actually a bunch of contracts that get paid then. That's the problem, maintenance contracts and that type of help, county retirement.
Mm.
Well, the ambulance. There's, some significant impacts of the delayed town meeting.
And I would expect we're going to have a pretty good crowd for town meeting because I think the dispatch is going to be a heavy subject and maybe even the ambulance. So I expect we're going to get a big crowd for our annual town meeting, whenever it does happen.
Yeah, closing the books and getting our state reports in to get our free cash certified is going to be another issue.
Yeah, oh, wow.
It's a new, I wouldn't say new normal, but it's going to be an interesting process to get out of this stuff that we've been in.
Mhm.
I think we'll be back, but when, I don't know.
It's very open-ended at this point.
Yep. By the way, I probably shouldn't do this in a public meeting. Did you hear about Mr. Lovejoy? John Lovejoy? Passed
No,
away?
no.
Did you know?
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
No, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, I don't know much. I heard it. I've heard it. I know he was very ill, but I just heard the other day that he passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
It's
That's too
unfortunate.
bad.
Yeah, he
What
was.
an interesting man.
He was more so than people thought or knew.
Yep.
I got to know him pretty well, and he was incredibly instrumental in that whole Minichog project. I know he was somehow sometimes tough to work with, but he was very instrumental in getting the state to pay attention to us. That's for sure.
Mhm.
I think it's fair to say, Paul, that the high school probably wouldn't have happened without him.
I would tell you that I would probably agree, even though I know the kinds of work a lot of people did, but he was extremely instrumental. He was a very interesting guy.
That's a real loss for the town, that's for sure.
Yep. Okay. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
All right, so figure 2 weeks from tonight. If anybody comes up with anything, just email Carol or I and we'll follow up on it.
Carol, when you put the announcement out, or the invitation,
Yeah.
don't put it out like 2 weeks before, because then I'll lose it in my emails.
Oh, sure.
Amen.
So now I have to keep track of what you want the day before and what you want 2 weeks before, Paul. You are
Absolutely.
high maintenance, man. You're high maintenance.
I am high maintenance. I know.
All right.
Thanks,
Okay,
guys.
thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
All right, good night.
Bye.